They thought I was gone for good, that I'd vanished quietly, broken and beaten, just another girl who lost everything and didn't know how to fight back. But what they didn't know was this: I was never truly lost. I was learning. I was watching. And I was becoming something they never expected: stronger. Let me ask you something. Have you ever stood in a room full of people and yet felt completely invisible? Not because you're shy or quiet, but because you've been dismissed. Count it out. Like your story was already written and buried. I lived that moment over and over again. And I wore a smile through every second of it until I didn't have to anymore. My name is Rachel Monroe. And this is how I made the world eat its words. It started in a quiet town in North Carolina, the kind of place where everyone knows your business before you do. The kind of place that gives second chances to the same people over and over again, while girls like me are left to clean up the mess. I grew up in a small blue house on Waverly Street, where my mother stitched clothes in the dining room and my father watched the sky like he was waiting for it to fall. I was the kind of daughter who dreamed big. College, career, a life outside these narrow streets. But dreams are expensive, and hope doesn't pay bills. I worked 2 jobs while studying, skipped sleep more nights than I can count, and still managed to graduate with honors. Not that anyone seemed to notice. Not my family. Not my so-called friends. Not even Jason, the man I thought would stand by me forever. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back to the day it all began to fall apart.
It was a Saturday.
One of those golden afternoons where everything feels too perfect, like life is setting you up for a punchline. I was standing in the middle of my tiny living room, holding a letter from a publishing company. A real one. They wanted to buy my manuscript, the one I had poured 3 years of my life into, in secret, while working night shifts at the diner. They loved it. They believed in my voice.
Me.
Rachel Monroe, the girl everyone had forgotten. I held that letter like it was a golden ticket. And the first person I wanted to tell was Jason. We'd been together for 4 years. We met in college. He was charming, driven, the kind of guy who made people feel seen. I believed he saw me. I really did. But when I told him the news, expecting fireworks, he looked at me like I'd told him I wanted to sell lemonade on the side of the road. "That's cute, Rachel," he said, not even looking up from his phone. "But don't get your hopes up. These companies will say anything to get your signature." I blinked. "Jason, they're offering an advance. Real money. This could." "Could," he interrupted. "Don't make it a bigger deal than it is." And just like that, the air went cold. Not because he didn't believe in the book, but because he didn't believe in me.
I should have walked away right then.
But when you've spent years convincing yourself that someone loves you, it's hard to admit they never did. So I smiled, nodded, tucked the letter away in a drawer, and told myself he was just having a bad day. That was mistake number 1. Mistake number 2? Telling my family. You'd think a girl getting a publishing deal would be cause for celebration. But when I called my mom, all she could say was, "Well, don't quit your day job just yet. You know how these things go." And my older sister? "You wrote a whole book? Where'd you find the time? Must be nice not having kids or responsibilities." That one stung. Because the truth is, I had always been the one quietly holding things together. Babysitting my sister's children when she ran off for the weekend. Sending grocery money to my mom when rent got tight. Showing up, even when no one noticed I was there. But when it was my turn to shine, even just a little, they turned their backs. And something inside me shifted. That week, I learned how to smile through gritted teeth. How to nod politely when someone called my dream a cute little project. How to take every comment, every doubt, and store it away like kindling. Because I knew one day I'd set it all on fire. And that day came sooner than anyone expected. 2 months later, the book hit digital shelves. I didn't tell anyone. No launch party. No grand announcement. I wanted to see who noticed. Who cared? The answer? No one. Except strangers. Within 3 weeks, it went viral on Book Talk. A girl in Seattle posted a 30-second clip crying over the final chapter. A teacher in Ohio emailed me to say she was using it in her classroom. And then came the flood. Thousands of downloads, reviews, messages.
People saw me.
And still, the people in my life didn't. Until the money came. Until the second book deal came. Until the local paper wrote a feature on me and titled it, "Local Girl Makes National Waves." And suddenly everyone remembered my name. Jason started texting again, sweet messages, casual flirts, little reminders of how good we had it. My sister tagged me in a Facebook post with a caption, "So proud of my baby sis. I always knew she had it in her." And my mom? She asked if she could come visit to see how her successful daughter was doing. But I wasn't angry. Not anymore. Because by then, I had learned the most important lesson of all. Silence is the loudest answer. And success is the sweetest revenge. I took their doubts, their dismissals, their condescension, and I turned them into stepping stones. But don't get me wrong, this isn't a fairy tale. It wasn't all easy wins and applause. There were nights I cried so hard I thought my ribs would crack. Days when I wanted to disappear because the weight of loneliness was too loud. Times when I almost called Jason just to feel like I belonged to someone again. But I didn't. Because deep down I knew, if I went back, I'd lose the one thing I fought so hard to find myself. They thought I was lost. They were wrong. I was just finding the road they refused to walk with me. And now, I've paved it in gold. But I haven't even told you the best part. You see, the real revenge? It came the day Jason showed up, uninvited, at my first book signing in New York. With his hair slicked back, that smug smile on his face, and a bouquet of cheap roses. He waited in line like everyone else. When it was his turn, he leaned down and whispered, "I always knew you'd make it." I smiled sweetly. Signed his book. To Jason. Thanks for the doubt, it made me unstoppable. And I watched the color drain from his face. That moment, that was my laugh. My last one. And it echoed in every corner of my soul. My name is Rachel Monroe, and for a long time, I thought being quiet meant being kind. That shrinking myself to keep others comfortable was some kind of virtue. That if I worked hard enough, stayed loyal enough, and loved deeply enough, the world would reward me. It didn't. Not at first. I grew up in a modest neighborhood in Asheville, North Carolina, tucked away between long stretches of pine trees and sleepy strip malls. Our house, painted a soft blue that faded each summer, wasn't much, but it was home. My mother, Helen, was a seamstress, always working 2 steps ahead of the rent. My father, Dennis, floated in and out, more present in theory than in practice. He left for good when I was 11. I was the youngest of 3. My brother, Tyler, left town the minute he turned 18 and barely looked back. And my sister, Melissa, took up space like a thunderstorm, loud, opinionated, unpredictable. She got pregnant at 19, married a guy who disappeared by 21, and now spends most of her days fighting with her teenage daughters or oversharing on Facebook. I learned early that being the good one earned me peace. I kept my grades up. I cooked dinner when Mom came home late. I listened when Melissa vented, even when she blamed me for things I couldn't control. I became a professional at fading into the background. But that didn't mean I didn't dream. From the time I could form sentences, I was writing. Short stories, diary entries, little poems on the backs of grocery receipts. Words were the one thing that made me feel seen, even when no one was looking. I didn't say much out loud, but my notebooks knew everything. I didn't think much would come of it. Writing, after all, was a hobby, not a path. That's what everyone around me said. My mother wanted me to be a nurse. Melissa said I'd probably end up a teacher if I didn't get married first. But in the quiet corners of my mind, I believed I could be something more. In high school, I submitted a short story to a state contest. I didn't tell anyone. When I won second place, I was too scared to tell my family. I thought they'd laugh. Or worse, they'd just nod and move on like it didn't matter. That kind of silence was sharper than a slap. College was my escape plan. I worked 3 jobs and earned scholarships just to get into a community college an hour away. It wasn't glamorous, but it was mine. For the first time, I was surrounded by people who didn't know my family, who didn't see me as just Helen's quiet girl. I got a job at a campus cafe, rented a tiny basement apartment, and kept to myself. That's where I met Jason. He was tall, confident, and charming in a way that made you feel like the only person in the room. He was studying business, loved to talk about success and legacy, and always seemed to know what he wanted. I was drawn to him instantly, not just because he was handsome, but because he looked at me like I mattered. At first, we started dating after 3 weeks. He told me he admired my ambition, that my quiet nature was mysterious and deep. He said I was different from the other girls he'd met. Real, he called me. Looking back, I realized Jason didn't want someone real. He wanted someone who made him feel big. And I did. At least for a while. He graduated a year before me and landed a job in a mid-sized tech company. We moved in together, his idea, not mine, into a one-bedroom apartment that he paid for. He said it was to give me time to focus on finishing school, but soon, that turned into him reminding me constantly that I owed him. Whenever I had a small win, acing a paper, getting praise from a professor, he'd shrug it off. "Don't let it go to your head," he'd say with a smirk. "You haven't even done anything yet." At first, I brushed it off as teasing. But over time, those little comments chipped away at me. I started second-guessing myself. Was I really talented or just naive? Was I being unrealistic with my writing dreams? Still, I wrote. Late at night, when Jason was asleep or glued to the TV, I'd sit in the corner of the living room and pour my soul into the keyboard. My first full-length novel took nearly 2 years to complete. I didn't tell him about it, not really. He knew I was working on something, but he never asked. And I never offered. Meanwhile, life moved on. I graduated with a degree in English and took a job as a receptionist at a local law firm. Stable, boring, and just enough to pay the bills. Jason started talking about marriage, kids, settling down. But not once did he ask what I wanted. Because deep down, he assumed I didn't have wants of my own. He saw me as an extension of him. A trophy of quiet devotion. Someone who wouldn't challenge his narrative. And that's when things began to change. One evening, I received an email from Artemis House Publishing, a small but respected indie publisher. I had sent them my manuscript on a whim months earlier, convinced it would end up in their slush pile forever. But they loved it. They wanted to publish it. They called it haunting, vulnerable, and urgent. They offered me a modest advance and a full editorial package. It felt like the ground had opened beneath me, in the best possible way. I remember staring at the screen, heart pounding, tears stinging my eyes. For the first time in years, I felt alive. I couldn't wait to tell someone. But the people I reached for first, the ones who were supposed to celebrate with me, just didn't. Jason's reaction was cold, detached, almost irritated. My mother's voice sounded tired when I called. "That's nice, honey. But don't get carried away. Writing isn't really a career. Just keep your head on straight." Melissa's words cut deeper. "Oh, so now you think you're better than the rest of us, because someone wants to print your diary entries? Don't let it go to your head." I hung up the phone that night and sat on my bed for hours. I wasn't crying. I was remembering. Every ignored birthday. Every joke at my expense. Every time I put others first while no one ever did the same for me. It was like my whole life clicked into place.
They weren't proud of me.
Because deep down they never thought I had it in me. And worse, they needed me to stay small. Because my growth made them look in the mirror. I learned that night that not everyone will celebrate your wins. Some people are more comfortable when you're losing. But I also learned something else. I didn't need their permission anymore. So, I signed a contract. Worked with my editor every evening after work. Saved every dollar from my advance. And slowly, quietly, I prepared to change my life. Jason noticed the shift, of course. I stopped asking for his opinion. Stopped catering to his moods. I began dressing differently, walking differently, dreaming differently. I wasn't angry. I was awakening. One night, he snapped. "You're not the same girl I met, Rachel." He meant it as a jab. I took it as a compliment. Because I had spent years being who everyone else needed me to be, sweet, small, quiet, dependable. Now I was becoming someone new. Someone whole. The months that followed were full of small rebellions. I started getting up earlier than Jason just to have a quiet hour to myself before work. I took my laptop to the coffee shop down the block and edited pages with trembling but determined fingers. I joined a local writers group under a pseudonym, and for the first time, I was surrounded by people who didn't belittle ambition, they fed it. I kept everything quiet, hidden, not because I was afraid, but because I wanted to protect this version of me, the one that was blooming, until I was ready. Jason, though, grew more volatile. The more I pulled away emotionally, the more he clung with passive aggression and veiled threats. One evening, I came home late from a publishing panel I had attended with my editor, Grace Middleton. It was the first time I met her in person. She was smart, elegant, and carried herself with the same quiet power I dreamed of embodying. That night had been magical. Grace told me I had something special, that she saw big things in my future. She even hinted at a potential feature in a regional author spotlight next year. I walked through our apartment door practically floating, until Jason looked up from the couch and sneered. "You're late. Didn't bother texting me?" "I did," I said calmly. "At 6:17. And again at 8. He rolled his eyes.
Right.
"You and your new little writing friends." I tried to brush it off. It was a great night, actually. He muted the TV. "I'm sure it was. Hanging around people who fill your head with crap. Don't forget who's been paying for this apartment while you chase some pipe dream." There it was. I'd heard the threat before, wrapped in different words. I looked him in the eyes and replied evenly, "You'll get your share of the rent next week. Don't worry." He laughed. "Oh, I'm not worried. I just don't want you thinking this whole author thing makes you special." It was strange. His words should have hurt, but instead, they bounced right off me, like bullets hitting steel. Because in that moment, I knew I no longer needed his approval or anyone else's. But things didn't get easier. In fact, they got harder. Melissa started spreading rumors online that I'd abandoned the family, that I thought I was better than everyone else now. She posted passive-aggressive statuses clearly aimed at me. My mother started calling less. When she did, she sounded disappointed that I didn't visit more or check in with Melissa's kids. But I was done playing caretaker for people who refused to grow. The pressure from every side was mounting. And I was tired. Tired of apologizing for wanting more. Tired of keeping my victories small to protect other people's egos. Tired of being quiet. Then came the tipping point. My debut novel, 1,000 Quiet Wars, was released in late spring. It wasn't a blockbuster, but it did better than anyone expected. My publisher ran out of first prints within a week. Early reviews called it gut-wrenching, graceful, and surprisingly fearless. Local bookstores asked for signings. And I was invited to speak at a small literary festival in Virginia. It was more than a dream come true, it was proof. Proof that I wasn't just talented. I was capable.
Worthy.
And I had done it without anyone's help but my own. But Jason? He didn't even read it. Didn't ask how it was going. Didn't show up to my first signing, even though it was 10 minutes from our apartment. The night of that event, I came home in a black dress and red lipstick, still buzzing from the applause and the strangers who told me my words made them cry. And there he was, slumped on the couch, half drunk, watching sports. He didn't even look up. I walked past him into the kitchen, placed the bouquet of roses from Grace on the counter, and started boiling water for tea. It wasn't until I pulled out a signed copy of my book from my bag and gently placed it on the coffee table that he spoke. "You're really milking this, huh?" I didn't even flinch. "I'm proud of what I created. You don't have to be."
He scoffed.
"Yeah, well, don't get used to it. You'll be back at your little receptionist desk soon enough." That was it. The line that ended it. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I just picked up my tea, walked into the bedroom, and shut the door. The next morning, I woke up early and made 3 calls. 1 to a realtor, 1 to Grace, and 1 to an attorney. Within 2 weeks, I had found a small 1-bedroom unit uptown and signed a lease with money from my book earnings. It wasn't flashy, but it was mine. When I told Jason I was moving out, he didn't believe me. When he realized I was serious, he called me selfish,
Dramatic.
ungrateful. But I just smiled and said, "You said I'd be lost without you. But it turns out, I've never been more found." That line didn't come from anger. It came from freedom. But just as I thought the hardest part was over, life threw one last curveball. A few weeks after moving out, my publisher called. My novel had been selected for a National Book Club feature. This was huge. Overnight, I went from a modestly known debut author to being featured on a major platform. Sales exploded. Interview requests poured in. I even got an offer for a movie option. It was surreal. And then came Melissa. Apparently, word had reached back home. My name was starting to show up online and people were noticing. That's when the phone rang. At first, I didn't recognize the number. But when I answered, her voice hit like a slap. "So now you're famous, huh?" I didn't know how to respond. She continued, "Mom's real upset. Says you could at least call. But I guess you're too busy now that you're better than us." There was again that venom disguised as victimhood. I stayed quiet. "You think I don't know what you're doing? You're writing about us, aren't you? Making money off the family? That's disgusting." I finally spoke calmly. "Melissa, the book is fiction." She laughed bitterly.
Sure.
"Fiction. That's what you're calling it." She hung up. 2 days later, I saw a Facebook post from her. It was a photo of me from high school, captioned, "Funny how the quiet ones turn out to be the most heartless." Comments rolled in, friends of hers, people I barely remembered, accusing me of betrayal, of forgetting where I came from. It hurt.
Of course it did.
But it didn't break me, because I had the truth. And the truth was, I didn't owe anyone my silence anymore. They weren't angry because I changed. They were angry because I refused to stay where they left me. One night, a few weeks later, I was invited to speak at a college creative writing panel in my hometown. I hesitated. Returning there felt like walking into a storm cloud. But something in me needed closure.
So I said yes.
The event was held in the community center auditorium. As I stepped onto the stage, I saw rows of young faces, hopeful, nervous, unsure of their own paths. And suddenly, I was one of them again. The moderator asked about my journey, my fears, the moment I decided to believe in myself. I didn't sugarcoat anything. I talked about the doubt, the loneliness, the people who couldn't celebrate me. I ended with this. Sometimes, the people who say you're lost are just afraid you'll find something they never had the courage to look for. Don't shrink for their comfort. Grow anyway. As I stepped down from the podium, I noticed her. Melissa, standing in the back of the room, arms crossed, face unreadable. I walked toward her slowly. For a second, we just stood there. And then she said quietly, "You really did it, huh?" I nodded.
Yeah.
I did. She looked at me, and for the first time in years, I didn't see anger in her eyes. I saw regret. She opened her mouth to say something, but stopped, then turned and walked away. And I let her. Because some doors don't need to be reopened. Some peace comes not from fixing, but from releasing. I didn't expect it to hit me the way it did. That night after the panel, I walked alone under the soft amber glow of the street lamps. My heels clicked against the sidewalk. The town looked smaller now. Not physically, but emotionally, like I had outgrown it. Every corner used to hold a weight. Now, it felt like a chapter one had finally finished reading. A week later, I was back in New York, sitting in a meeting with my agent, Vanessa Cole, and a group of producers. They wanted to adapt A Thousand Quiet Wars into a limited series. They were excited, offering a seat at the writer's table, a say in casting, and a six-figure deal. I remember sitting in that polished glass office listening to them talk, sipping my coffee, and realizing this was it. Not just a dream come true. It was my dream, my moment, and nobody had given it to me. I had carved it out from silence, from rejection, from doubt. Word by word. Page by page. Later that night, after everything was signed, I walked into my apartment, now full of life and light, plants in the windowsill, manuscript pages on the table, a shelf full of books with my name on the spine. And I cried. Not because I was sad, but because I had finally come home to myself. Then came the message. A simple email, no subject. From Jason. Saw the article about your show. Guess I was wrong. Congrats, really. Hope you're happy. I stared at the words for a moment. And then, without a second thought, I deleted it. No reply. No need. Because I was happy. And I didn't need his approval to stay that way. But just when I thought the dust had settled, something unexpected happened. One of the producers, Aubrey Lane, wanted to change the setting of the series. She wanted something more marketable. More flashy. Less subtle. It's a great story, she said. But we're thinking less emotional grief, more shock value. Maybe throw in a love triangle. And let's make the main character younger, edgier. I felt the room spinning. This wasn't the story I wrote. This wasn't me. I glanced over at Vanessa. Her eyes were sympathetic but cautious. You still have creative input, Lily, she said gently. But this is a big opportunity. You don't want to get labeled as difficult. That word, difficult. For years, I had bent myself to avoid it, smiling when I was dismissed, staying quiet to keep the peace, pretending I didn't mind when others took up space I deserved. But that Lily? She didn't live here anymore. I cleared my throat. I appreciate the interest, I said slowly. But if we're changing the soul of the story, I'm not interested. Silence. Vanessa blinked. Aubrey narrowed her eyes. You're passing up a massive opportunity, she said. I nodded.
No.
I'm passing up compromise disguised as opportunity. I stood up, smoothed my jacket, and walked out. That night, I didn't cry. I celebrated. Because sometimes, standing firm is more victorious than signing $1 million deal. Within days, I posted a video online explaining my decision. Not out of spite, but out of truth. I won't let anyone reshape the story I nearly lost myself writing. Success means nothing if I have to silence the voice that got me here. The video went viral. People from all over wrote to me, readers, writers, dreamers, thanking me for choosing integrity over profit. And then, something even more surprising happened. A small, independent studio reached out. One run by women. Artists. Creatives who understood the depth behind each word I wrote. They didn't want to change anything. They wanted to honor it. By the end of the month, we were in pre-production. As filming began, I visited the set on a crisp autumn day. Leaves rustled in gold and copper as I stood behind the camera and watched an actress breathe life into the character based on me. She moved through a recreated version of my childhood bedroom, same peeling posters, same lavender walls, and whispered the line I had written during my darkest night. They called me lost. But maybe being lost is how we find the parts of ourselves they tried to erase. Goosebumps crawled up my arms. Behind me, Grace stood silent. Then she whispered, "You did it, Lily. You really did it." I smiled. "No," I replied. "We did. Every person who ever got told to stay small. Every woman who was told she was too quiet, too emotional, too ambitious." Grace's eyes glistened. "Well, the world's watching now." Months passed. The series premiered. Reviews poured in, calling it the most emotionally honest show of the year. My name started trending. Book sales exploded again. I was invited to sit on panels, speak on podcasts, even got a call from Oprah's team. It was dizzying. But I stayed grounded. Because I knew fame wasn't the destination. Freedom was. Then came the final confrontation. One morning, as I sat in a cafe working on my second novel, my phone rang. It was my mother. I hadn't spoken to her in nearly a year. I stared at the screen, heart pounding. I answered. Her voice was shaky. "Lily, I watched the show." I didn't respond. She continued. "I didn't understand before. What you were feeling. What you went through." A long pause. "I'm sorry." Tears welled in my eyes. Not because I wanted her to grovel, but because after all these years she finally saw me. We talked for over an hour. It wasn't perfect, but it was honest. She admitted her silence. her fear, her regret for not protecting me when Melissa twisted everything. And in that moment, I realized something profound. Forgiveness isn't always about letting others off the hook. Sometimes, it's about letting yourself be free. That night, I stood on the balcony of my apartment. The city shimmered beneath me. I held a glass of wine in one hand, my manuscript in the other, and I smiled. They thought I was lost, that I'd fade into the background, be the girl who stayed quiet, who gave up, who apologized for dreaming. But instead, I became the woman who owned her silence and then turned it into a symphony. They tried to laugh at me. Now, the world laughs with me, because I had the last laugh. And it was beautiful. So here we are, full circle. And if you've made it this far, maybe something in this story mirrors something inside you. Maybe you, too, have been counted out, misunderstood, overlooked,
Mocked.
maybe they whispered behind your back, or maybe they laughed to your face. Maybe you once believed them, that you were too much or not enough. Maybe you still hear their voices late at night, trying to crawl into your dreams like shadows. I've been there. I know what it's like to carry someone else's opinion like a chain around your neck. I know what it's like to want to shrink just to keep the peace. To bury your light so no one calls it arrogant. To swallow your truth so no one labels it dramatic. But listen to me now, and listen well. Their words do not define you. Their judgment is not your mirror. You are not broken. You are becoming. You are still in the middle of your story. And even if the last chapter was messy, even if it was full of loss and silence and hurt, you still hold the pen. The next chapter? That's yours. No one else gets to write it. Not the people who walked away. Not the ones who underestimated you. Not the family who failed to protect you. Not the critics who never even tried to understand.
You. Just you.
You get to decide whether this is the end of your story, or the beginning of the greatest plot twists they never saw coming. Because sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is keep going. I didn't know, back then, when I sat alone on that bus, with nothing but a notebook and a cracked phone, that one day people would know my name. I didn't know, when I cried on the floor of a cheap apartment, that those tears were watering the roots of something I'd eventually grow into. I didn't know, when my own family doubted me, that one day the world would turn its eyes toward the truth I carried. I didn't know I'd ever stand tall. I only knew I couldn't stay down. And if you're in your own version of that moment right now, if you feel like the walls are closing in, like your voice has gone hoarse, like the people around you have forgotten how to see you, then this is what I want you to remember. Being lost doesn't mean you're defeated. It means you're still searching. And sometimes, the search is where the power begins. Let them think you're lost. Let them laugh. Because one day, when you rise, not with rage, but with grace, they won't even recognize the strength you became. People love to cheer for the underdog after they've won. But few stay long enough to hold your hand when you're crawling through the storm. That's why the victory is yours. Not because of the applause you receive, but because of the silence you survived. Because of the tears you wiped yourself. Because of the nights you stayed up working, even when your hands trembled. Because of the days you chose kindness over pettiness, healing over vengeance, purpose over popularity. Because you kept showing up for yourself, even when no one else did. That's what makes your story powerful. Not perfection, but resilience. You know, when I titled my book 1,000 Quiet Wars, I didn't know how prophetic it would become. Because all of us fight them. Wars no one sees. Battles inside our hearts, behind our smiles, beneath our laughter. We fight to be heard, to be taken seriously, to be seen for who we really are, not who they expect us to be. And every time you choose to speak anyway, to create anyway, to heal anyway, you win another quiet war. So here's my final message to you, from one warrior to another. Keep fighting, even if your voice shakes, even if your hands tremble, even if you have to do it alone for a while, especially then. Because someday soon, you'll wake up in a life you built on truth, and not one of those people who once laughed at you will be able to ignore the sound of your joy. Let them think they've figured you out. Let them believe they've seen the end of your story. They haven't. They've only witnessed your pause, not your plot twist.
So rise, create, speak.
Choose yourself. And when the world finally turns to look at you, don't look down. Don't apologize for the brilliance you've become. Stand tall and smile. Because in that moment, when the spotlight hits your truth and the applause echoes where the laughter once stung, you'll remember. They thought you were lost, but you had the last laugh. And it was louder than they ever imagined.